Have you ever noticed how some people only care when they think you're useful? They show up with smiles, but only when it benefits them. They ask how you're doing, but listen just enough to store your words, not support your heart. And the moment you stop oversharing, their warmth cools like it was never real. It's like a spider that doesn't chase, but waits, quiet, patient, pretending to be harmless while spinning a web just out of sight. Or think of a shadow that only stays close when the light is strong, disappearing the moment things grow dark. That's the kind of care that isn't care at all, because while they're pretending to care, you have a choice. Keep giving them pieces of you, or protect your peace with silence. And the moment you stop explaining, stop proving, stop feeding their curiosity, that's when their mask starts to slip. That's when the illusion falls apart. So how do you spot someone who pretends to care while secretly planning your downfall? Stay with me, because the last one reveals everything. Let's get started. But before we dive in, pay attention to this story, which will help you better understand the wisdom in this material. The story of Ryan, the wolf that wore the rain. Ryan had always been a believer in kindness. He gave people the benefit of the doubt, extended second chances, and convinced himself that loyalty meant overlooking small betrayals. But over time, those small things piled up. Cancelled plans that came without reason, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, and compliments that felt calculated. Something didn't sit right, but every time he tried to name it, he talked himself out of it. "They're probably just going through something," he'd whisper. Until the day came when the betrayal could no longer be excused. It began with a rumor, a twisted version of something he'd said in confidence, now echoing back to him in the voice of someone who was never supposed to know. Ryan felt something inside him crack, not just from the breach of trust, but from the realization of who had carried it. The one who always said, "I've got your back." The one who stood beside him, nodding, encouraging, smiling, while chiseling at the floor beneath his feet. Shaken, Ryan visited his older cousin Victor, a man who had once been betrayed by his closest friend during a business fallout. Victor listened, then walked Ryan outside into the drizzle. "You know what's worse than a storm?" Victor asked, watching the clouds roll in. "A wolf that wears the rain like a disguise." Ryan frowned. Victor knelt and picked up a soaked grey pelt from under the porch, something Ryan hadn't noticed at all. When a predator hides in plain sight, it doesn't roar. It listens, it comforts, it adapts, it waits until you're drenched, tired, off guard, and then it strikes. Ryan stood in stunned silence. Victor continued, "People who plan against you don't come with fangs. They come with towels. They dry your wounds, offer shelter, then they mark your weakest spots." From that day on, Ryan's entire view shifted. He stopped measuring people by what they said and started watching what they repeated. Who they got close to when you weren't around, how they listened to your pain, and used it later. He didn't confront the betrayer, he just went quiet. So quiet that even the wolf had no wind to ride on. And when the storm finally came, Ryan was no longer standing in the open. He was already rebuilding elsewhere. Because the most dangerous betrayal doesn't come from those who hate you. It comes from the ones who sit beside you in silence, while quietly plotting the fall they hope you won't see coming. Before we begin with the first lesson, if you find these videos helpful, I encourage you to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on the latest content. Let's begin. Number 1. Their support feels performative. Let's talk about one of the most confusing forms of betrayal. Someone whose support looks genuine on the surface, but behind the scenes, it's hollow. These are the people who show up just enough to be seen as a good friend. They comment on your wins, send the occasional check-in text, and stand by you during the easy moments. But when things actually get hard, when you truly need someone, they're nowhere to be found. And if they do show up, their presence feels forced, calculated. Not because they care, but because they want to be seen caring. Here's the truth. Their presence is more about optics than intention. They're more interested in being seen as supportive than actually being supportive. They'll repost your success on social media, but won't call you to celebrate it in private. They'll offer help in public, but go silent when you reach out in private. Their support is performative. It's curated to protect their image, not to uplift you. And deep down, they hope their surface-level effort is enough to keep your trust, while they quietly distance themselves from your real needs. This is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Epictetus once said, "Do not be deceived by appearances. Time reveals the truth of character." In other words, someone can wear the costume of a loyal friend, but over time, their actions or lack of action will always tell the truth. A real supporter won't just show up when it's convenient or visible. They'll show up when it's difficult, when it's quiet, when no one's watching, because their concern isn't about being perceived as good, it's about actually being good. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Grace, went through a difficult period after losing her job. She'd always been the dependable one in her circle, hosting, helping, and showing up for others. But when she hit her lowest point, she expected the same in return. One friend in particular had always branded herself as Grace's ride or die. She posted photos with Grace, always praised her publicly, and was the first to comment on her milestones. But when Grace reached out for actual help, support with bills, even just someone to talk to, that same friend suddenly became unavailable. She said all the right things, but made no effort to back them up. And that's when Grace saw the truth. Her friend didn't care about her struggle. She cared about being seen as someone who did. Once the cameras were off and the attention faded, so did her support. It was never about Grace. It was about maintaining the performance. So, how do you handle someone like this? First, stop giving them credit for empty gestures. Praise means nothing if it isn't followed by presence. Second, observe how people act when you're struggling, not when you're shining. That's where their real loyalty shows. And finally, distance yourself from performative supporters. You don't need people who care for appearances. You need people who care for real. At the end of the day, real support doesn't need to be seen, it's felt. So trust actions over applause, presence over praise, and truth over performance. The right people won't need an audience to care. Number 2. They ask questions that feel like surveillance. Let's talk about a form of manipulation that feels like friendship on the surface. Yet beneath it, there's calculation. Someone who asks questions not out of care, but control. These are the people who seem curious about everything you're doing. They ask how your job's going, what your next move is, who you've been spending time with, or what your future plans are. But as you answer, something feels off. Their tone is neutral, their expressions unreadable, and once you finish sharing, they never offer anything back. No support, no insight, just silence, or a carefully worded, "That's interesting." Here's the truth. Their curiosity isn't rooted in concern. It's about collecting information. They're not asking to cheer you on. They're asking to assess where you are, what you're thinking, and how it might affect them. This isn't connection, it's quiet surveillance. They want to measure your growth, track your movements, and silently calculate how your progress impacts their own sense of control. They don't need to outshine you publicly, just stay a few steps ahead privately. And every question they ask is a breadcrumb in their game of quiet strategy. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes critical. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Be guarded with your words. Not all who listen are allies." In other words, just because someone listens doesn't mean they're listening with good intentions. Some people listen to understand, Others listen to compare, and some, they listen only to gather data, not to support you, not to walk with you, but to study your moves like a competitor disguised as a companion. Let me share a story. A guy I know, let's call him Brian, had a friend who always seemed supportive, always asked questions like, "What are you working on these days?" or "Any new plans coming up?" At first, Brian appreciated the interest. It felt good to have someone check in, but over time, he started noticing patterns. Whenever Brian shared a goal or plan, this friend would either downplay it or quietly imitate it. He'd offer no help, no excitement, just silence, followed by subtle moves that aligned a little too closely with Brian's path. One time, Brian mentioned he was applying for a position at a firm he'd been eyeing. A few weeks later, this friend casually mentioned he had applied too, without ever discussing it before. That's when Brian realized this wasn't support, it was surveillance. His friend wasn't listening to help him, he was listening to stay ahead of him, to gather enough information to position himself strategically. Brian felt exposed, not because he had shared too much, but because he had shared it with someone who never intended to protect what he heard. So how do you deal with people like this? First, don't overshare. Just because someone asks doesn't mean they deserve answers. Second, test their intentions. Share something small and watch what they do with it. Do they offer encouragement, or do they store it like ammunition? Third, create distance. You don't need to explain your silence. You owe no one access to your plans, especially those who misuse what they hear. At the end of the day, not all curiosity is kind. Some people ask questions not to connect, but to compete, control, or calculate. So protect your vision, speak less, move wisely, and remember, real friends don't study you like a puzzle. They walk beside you without needing to keep score. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to leave a comment with a "thank God" and give it a like if you enjoyed the content. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting videos. I hope you find inspiration in them and that we continue learning together. Thank you for your support. Number 3, they echo your words, but not your emotions. Let's talk about one of the most subtle forms of emotional detachment, when someone mirrors your words, but not your feelings. These are the people who nod at the right moments, repeat back your struggles with perfectly timed sympathy, and say all the right things, yet something always feels off. Their responses are polished, their expressions are neutral, and their comfort feels manufactured. It's not that they're saying anything wrong, it's that their words have no weight, no depth, no soul. It's like talking to a well-written script instead of a present human being. Here's the truth. People who pretend to care often get really good at echoing language, but not emotion. They've learned the phrases that make them sound supportive. That must have been hard. "I'm here if you need anything. You're so strong." But behind those words is an emotional void. They don't ask follow-up questions. They don't stay in the silence with you. They don't check in later to see how you're really doing. It's like they've copied empathy without ever feeling it. And you walk away from those conversations feeling more alone than before, because deep down, you know they were never really in the room with you. This is where Stoic wisdom helps us cut through the noise. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Words are wind, observe the soul behind them." What he meant is simple. Words are easy, meaning them is what matters. Anyone can say they care, but true presence can't be faked. It's felt. It shows up in body language, in the pause before a reply, in the quiet attention someone gives when you're breaking down. You can't script that. You can only live it. Let me tell you a story. A woman I know, let's call her Rachel, lost her father after a long illness. During that time, everyone around her said the usual things. "I'm so sorry. Let me know if you need anything." But only one friend, Jessica, actually sat with her. She didn't say much. She just showed up, made tea, and sat in the quiet with Rachel while she cried. Meanwhile, another friend, Emily, sent long messages full of well-phrased support, but never called, never visited, never followed up. And later, Rachel saw that same friend posting cheerful photos online as if nothing had happened. Rachel told me, her words were perfect, but I felt emptier after reading them. That's the danger of hollow empathy. It tricks you into thinking someone's present when they're actually absent behind the scenes. So how do you protect yourself from this? First, trust your instincts. If the connection feels cold, despite warm words, it probably is. Second, pay attention to consistency. Does their support extend beyond the initial conversation? Do they remember, follow up, stay close when things get quiet? And finally, honor the difference between performance and presence. Real care doesn't need perfect wording, it just needs to be real. At the end of the day, don't settle for echoed sympathy. You deserve people who feel with you, not just talk at you. Because when someone truly cares, their presence speaks louder than any script ever could. Number 4, they're always around during chaos, never during calm. Let's talk about a certain kind of presence that feels comforting at first, but over time starts to reveal something darker. These are the people who always seem to be there when things are falling apart, but never when they're coming together. They reach out when you're struggling, show up when you're in pain, and check in just as your world starts to feel unstable. But the moment you begin to heal, grow, or stabilize, they vanish, quietly, effortlessly, like they were never there. It's confusing, because on the surface, they look like they care. They're the first to ask, "Are you okay?" or "Do you want to talk?" But the more you observe, the clearer it becomes. They don't come to lift you. They come to watch, to gather details, to feel superior, to feed off your vulnerability. In chaos, you're accessible, distracted, easier to manipulate. But in peace, you're clear-minded, confident, harder to influence, and that's when they disappear. Here's the truth. Someone who only shows up when you're broken isn't always trying to help you rebuild. Sometimes they're invested in your instability. Your struggle gives them a role to play, a reason to be close without truly connecting. And once you no longer need saving, they lose interest. Because it was never about you. It was about what your pain gave them, a sense of purpose, control, or secret satisfaction. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes your shield. Epictetus once said, "A false friend waits for weakness, not for wisdom." In other words, they don't wait for you to rise, they wait for you to fall. They're not inspired by your clarity, they're attracted to your confusion. Because when you're hurting, they feel needed. When you're grounded, they feel irrelevant. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Andrew, went through a tough divorce. During that time, one of his colleagues, Tyler, was constantly around, offering advice, checking in, grabbing coffee. At first, Andrew was grateful. He thought Tyler genuinely cared. But once the dust settled and Andrew began to rebuild his life, Tyler's tone changed. He became distant, less warm, and soon passive-aggressive. One day, Andrew overheard Tyler talking to another co-worker about his divorce, sharing private things Andrew had told him in confidence. That's when it hit him. Tyler hadn't been supporting him. He'd been collecting pieces of his chaos. So what do you do when someone only shows up for your worst moments? First, notice the pattern. Do they call when things are calm or only when you're in crisis? Second, check their energy. Do they listen and uplift or subtly dig for details and dramatize your pain? And third, honor your peace. If your stability makes someone pull away, let them. It means they were never truly invested in your healing, only in your hurt. At the end of the day, a real friend walks with you through storms and sunshine, but someone who thrives in your chaos, that's not support, it's surveillance dressed as sympathy. Protect your peace. It's not for spectators. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 5. They use your vulnerabilities as future weapons. Let's talk about one of the most dangerous signs someone is pretending to care, when they take what you've shared in confidence and store it. Not to understand you better, but to use it later. At first, they seem like the perfect listener. They nod when you open up. They say, "You can tell me anything." And you do. You tell them about your fears, your past mistakes, your regrets, the moments you don't share with just anyone. It feels safe until it doesn't. Because weeks or months later, that same person suddenly references those moments, but not to comfort you, not to support you, but to guilt you, to shame you, or worse, to win an argument. They twist your vulnerability into a weapon, and it hits harder than any insult could. Not because it's cruel, but because it's accurate. You shared it, and now they're using it to control you. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes armor. Seneca once wrote, "To betray trust is worse than to deny friendship altogether." Why? Because betrayal wears the mask of love. It's harder to spot. It confuses the heart. When someone denies you friendship from the start, you know where they stand. But when someone pretends to care, only to later turn your pain into ammunition, it's not just manipulation, it's betrayal in its most intimate form. Let me tell you a story. A guy I know, let's call him Chris, went through a rough patch after losing his job. He confided in someone he thought was a close friend, Brian. He shared how it made him feel like a failure, how it affected his confidence. Brian seemed supportive. He even checked in often. But months later, during a disagreement, Brian said, "Well, maybe if you didn't crumble every time life gets hard, you wouldn't always feel like a failure." Chris was stunned. That comment didn't come from concern. It came from memory. A moment he had once shared in trust, now twisted into an attack. That's when Chris realized Brian wasn't storing those conversations to understand him. He was filing them away like ammunition, just in case. So what do you do when someone turns your trust into a trap? First, pull back. Not every listener deserves your unfiltered truth. Second, notice how they handle your low moments. Do they bring them up later as evidence or as empathy? And third, protect your inner world. Your vulnerability is sacred. Give it only to those who hold it gently. At the end of the day, someone who turns your honesty into leverage was never building a bond. They were building a case. And when care is just control in disguise, it's not love. It's manipulation wearing a kind face. Guard your heart and choose your confidants wisely. Number 6. They pretend to defend you, but only in public. Let's talk about a very specific kind of deception. The person who pretends to stand up for you when people are watching, but goes silent the moment no one's around. In public, they act like your protector. They interrupt rumors with just the right amount of outrage. They say things like, "Hey, don't talk about them like that," or "I've got their back." And on the surface, it seems like loyalty. It looks like friendship, but when the noise dies down, so does their voice. When it's just them and someone disrespecting you behind closed doors, they say nothing. They let the moment pass. Or worse, they agree in subtle, quiet ways. Here's the hard truth. When someone only defends you when there's an audience, they're not protecting you. They're protecting their image. Their support is a performance, not a principle. It's meant to look good, not do good. And if you look closely, you'll see it's not about you at all. It's about how they want to be seen, as kind, as loyal, as morally good. But true loyalty, it doesn't need a stage. It shows up when no one's clapping. This is where Stoic philosophy cuts through the illusion. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Virtue is silent when it is real. It does not need an audience." Meaning, real character doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't ask, "Who's watching?" before doing what's right. Someone who genuinely respects you will defend you whether it benefits them or not. They'll speak up behind closed doors. They'll correct the story when you're not there to fix it yourself. And they'll do it quietly, without posting it, sharing it, or asking for credit. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Natalie, was in a friend group where one person, Rachel, always acted like her biggest cheerleader. In group settings, Rachel would speak up if someone made a sarcastic comment or tried to downplay Natalie's work. She'd say, "That's not fair. She's doing amazing." But Natalie later found out through another friend that when Rachel was alone with others, she stayed quiet during moments of gossip. Sometimes she even participated. It crushed her. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the hypocrisy. The public support was a mask. The private silence was the truth. So how do you handle someone like that? First, match words to action. Does their loyalty extend past the stage lights? Second, listen to what others say when you're not around. Truth often leaks through whispers. And third, stop mistaking performance for principle. At the end of the day, if someone needs an audience to defend you, they were never defending you at all. They were defending their role in your life, and that's not protection, it's PR. True loyalty doesn't perform, it acts, even in silence, especially when no one's watching. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 7. They disappear when you set boundaries. Let's talk about one of the clearest signs someone's care was never real. They vanish the moment you start honoring your limits. In the beginning, they seem warm, involved, always available. They check in, offer support, and make you feel like you matter. But the second you say, "I can't," or "I need space," something shifts. Their replies get colder. Their visits stop. You notice small punishments, passive silence, distant tones, jokes with hidden jabs, and slowly, the warmth fades. Here's the truth. Someone who disappears when you set a boundary was never committed to you. They were committed to access. As long as you were available, agreeable, and easy to influence, they stayed. But the moment you choose self-respect over their convenience, they withhold affection, attention, or connection. They make you question whether you did something wrong, but you didn't. You simply said, "This is my line," and they didn't like that you had one. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes your clarity. Epictetus once said, "A friend who fades with honesty was only present for comfort, not truth." That means their care was never about who you are. It was about how easily you fit into their world. They liked you more when you were pliable, when your time, energy, and emotions were theirs to use without question. But the moment you started honoring yourself, you became inconvenient, and they pulled away, not because you were wrong, but because your strength made them uncomfortable. Let me tell you a story. A woman I know, let's call her Danielle, had a friend named Sarah who was always around. They talked daily, go out often, and it felt like a deep bond. But Danielle started therapy, began focusing on her own healing, and set firmer boundaries. She said no to last-minute plans, took longer to reply, prioritized her rest. And just like that, Sarah disappeared. No explanation, just silence. Months later, when Danielle bumped into her and asked what happened, Sarah said, "You just changed. You became distant." But Danielle hadn't become distant. She'd become healthy, and Sarah only valued her when she was available, not when she was whole. So how do you respond when someone punishes you for setting boundaries? First, don't chase them. Their reaction reveals everything. Second, trust that real relationships grow stronger with boundaries, not weaker. And third, remember this. Self-respect might cost you fake connections, but it will never cost you what's real. At the end of the day, someone who disappears when you start honoring yourself wasn't showing love. They were enjoying your silence, your compliance, your exhaustion. But real care doesn't shrink when you grow. It expands with you, and if it can't, it was never care to begin with. If you believe this video can help others, give it a like. It helps the YouTube algorithm show it to more people. And don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will definitely reply.